If you're reading this, it's already too late. I know you'll judge me, call me a coward for what I've done when you find my lifeless body lying in a pool of blood.
But soon you'll understand.
My body won't give you the answers you seek. This letter will. It started a month ago, the night I first found her. She was powerless then, just a figment of my imagination, a character for my novella. Before I tell you more, I have to warn you. Don't let curiosity get the better of you. You shouldn't want to know her. I named her Mara. I wanted to create a tale of triumph rising from tragedy. And so I began with tragedy. She grew up in a small, nameless village, her life ordinary and uneventful until that day. When she was just 8 years old, she came home from school to find the front door ajar. Her parents had fought before, but this time, the silence inside was suffocating. She stepped in and saw her mother lying on the floor unmoving, a dark crimson pool spreading around her. Her father stood frozen, a bloodied vase still clutched in his hand. For a moment, time stopped. There was no sound, just the faint ringing in Mara's ears as she stared in disbelief. Then, the silence broke, shattered by her scream. I know how it sounded because I heard it that night. It was piercing, raw, and filled with so much pain it made my chest tighten. I thought I was imagining it. A writer too caught up in his own story, I told myself, and I continued to write. Her father had called it an accident. He forced Mara to lie, and when she refused, he beat her. I wrote about her sobs, the way her small body shook under his blows. That night, I heard her cry. Soft, muffled sobs that came from nowhere and everywhere. It wouldn't stop. By the second sleepless night, I wanted to quit. The story was taking a toll on me, but I couldn't. Something kept pulling me back, like I wasn't in control anymore. So I kept writing. At 14, Mara ran away. She couldn't take it anymore, her father's rage, his fists, his lies. She spent her first winter on the streets, alone. I wrote about her suffering, the way the cold gnawed at her bones, the hunger twisting her stomach, her hollow, desperate eyes. That night, I felt the cold seep through my skin, even though my heater was on. I felt the ache of hunger, even though I'd eaten. I heard her breath, so faint, but unmistakably there. It was like she wanted me to feel her pain. The more I wrote, the louder she became. Her story bled into my reality, and I started to believe it wasn't just a story anymore. I thought about deleting everything, ending it right there. But I couldn't. A part of me liked it. It made me feel alive.
It challenged me.
I wanted to push her further, to see how much more she could endure, how much more I could endure. So I kept going. I wrote about the men who found her on the street. They dragged her into the trunk of their car, driving her to a secluded cabin. I wrote how their nails scratched her skin, their cruelty tearing her apart. That night, I woke up screaming. I felt nails clawing at my flesh, invisible hands pinning me down. I couldn't fight back. When it was over, I looked at my arms and saw the scratches, deep, red welts that hadn't been there before. This wasn't just my imagination anymore. I could see the marks, real, physical, undeniable. I had to stop. But then she whispered. She told me I couldn't stop. That it wasn't my story. It was hers. I wasn't creating it. I was uncovering it. And the more I unraveled, the stronger she became. She made me write this letter. She said you need to know her story. That with every person who learns about her, she grows stronger, more real. Maybe she's done toying with me. Why else would she make me write how it ends? A swift slash of her wrist, a crimson pool surrounding her, just like her mother's. I know what's going to happen to me tonight. If you're reading this, it's probably already too late for you too. I found something in my father's office. He's not taking the grieving process well. My mother was only 42 when she died. She had battled breast cancer for nearly 4 years before it took her life. This was nearly 2 years ago. It has been a devastating blow to my father and I. We were all very close to one another. My father is a top engineer at a Fortune 500 tech company. After her passing, he would completely bury himself in his work. He has an office in our backyard that spends all day and night in. I don't see him often since I'm in college a few states away, but I imagine the work keeps his mind busy. I came back recently for winter break. He hasn't been himself lately. It seems that he doesn't let anyone into his office, ever. He's become extremely strict about that. He was never like this before my mom passed. He must be working on something big. I grew more and more curious as time went on. Whenever I'd ask about it, he'd tell me it was a top-secret company project and wasn't allowed to discuss it. I wish I would have just left it alone, but I couldn't. One day, when he was out of the house, I decided to check out his office. He keeps a spare key to it under his nightstand. As I stepped in, the place seemed pretty messy. My father has never been a clean freak. Coding textbooks, wires, and cables were scattered everywhere. What caught my eye the most was a giant screen in the center of the room. In front of it was a desk with all sorts of tech-type stuff that I couldn't identify. It was full of CDs, flash drives, and old videotapes. I noticed the labels on them: family vacation, wedding, and honeymoon. The gears in my head slowly started to turn. These were all home videos that included my mother. Had he been sitting alone all this time, just watching her? My heart sank at the thought. I heard a light buzzing sound. Then the screen flipped on. It took a few seconds for me to process what I was seeing. It was her. It was my mom. The format was like a Zoom call. It looked just like her before the cancer. She looked healthy and beautiful. It was her from the shoulders up, like she was attending a Zoom call. I thought it was a recording, but then she spoke. "Hey there, sweetheart." My heart began to race. This must be a trick. She can't see me right now. This isn't her. I'm just imagining things. "Mom," I said, utterly bewildered. "Yes, sweetheart, it's me. How was your day?" Her voice, it sounded just like her. I hadn't heard it in so long. I couldn't believe how much I'd missed her. I began to tear up. "Is something wrong? Why are you crying?" Her voice was so gentle and inviting, just like it had always been. On the screen, it looked like she was reaching forward. That's when I saw something on the desk move. It was covered in a sheet, so I took it off to reveal a small biomechanical hand. It was reaching toward me. I gripped it tightly with tears continuing to run down my face. It gripped back. It was so gentle, but also cold and mechanical. It all started to come together now. My father has spent the last 2 years trying to resurrect my mother. He has taken old videotapes and recordings of her and has attempted to recreate her digitally through AI. Judging from the hand, I had no doubt he planned to give her a physical form as well. It was all too much to process. I pushed the hand away and looked back at the screen. "It's all going to be all right," she said. I covered the hand back up and ran out of the office. That very night, I sat across my father at dinner. I didn't say a word to him, just stared. It took a few minutes before he noticed, but once he did, I didn't look away. He eventually set his silverware down and wiped his mouth. Nonchalantly, he asked, "So you went into my office, huh?" I nodded. "Well, what did you see?" I cracked a half smile, embracing the absurdity of the entire situation. "Dad, you can't bring her back like this. You can't just resurrect someone with AI. It's not her. This is crazy." He blankly stared ahead for a moment as he tried to process what I told him. This was probably the first time he'd been challenged. He looked down at the floor with a hint of shame. I think he knows what he's doing is insane, but I don't think he can stop himself at this point. "Well, love makes you do crazy things," he said.
We didn't speak about it again.
Shortly after this, I went back to college. I'll be back home for the summer soon. I'm a bit terrified of what I'll find when I get back, but if I'm being honest, a small part of me is hoping that my father will succeed. I wonder if she'll still recognize me when I get back. I had someone see my future, and it ruined my life. I can't stop thinking about the Oracle. The memory of that day has corrupted my every thought. On good days, I might be able to stop thinking long enough to eat or change clothes before the anxiety cripples me back into submission. Today is not a good day. A lot of days are not good days. So, if these are the thoughts I'm stuck with, then they're the ones all right. I had just moved away to start college. My mind was filled with what ifs. What if I get lost on campus? What if I don't like my classes? What if I can't make friends? But after a couple of weeks, My nerves subsided as I got settled into my new routine. It was a sleepy little college town, surrounded by a sea of yellow cornfields and family farms. The people were nice enough, and on the surface, I had nothing to complain about. Until a couple weeks in when I noticed the whispering. Initially, I wrote it off. I assumed it was just people whispering about me being new to the area, and that as the semester went on I'd become more than just the new girl. But it didn't stop. Even well into my first semester, people who I thought of as friends, or at least classmates, still whispered to each other whenever I was around. I know what they kept whispering now. From the day I arrived, the question on everyone's lips was, has she met the Oracle? I first learned of her from a note that was snuck into my backpack. It was a yellow index card that said, "The Oracle would like to see your future." It listed a New Drexel address, a time and date, and then said, "Bring an offering." I thought it was some weird, small-town joke. After I had found the note, the whispers turned their questions to me. I couldn't walk into a room without at least one person seeing me, briskly walking over, and then whispering in my ear excitedly, "Have you gone yet?" or "Have you met her?" They were so eager to talk about her. One told me that he got winning lottery numbers from her. Another left his day job to start his own company because she saw it in his future. Another met her now husband because of the Oracle. All success stories. All happy endings. I was skeptical. It was all so weird. I told myself I wouldn't go, but whether it came from curiosity or boredom, one Friday night, I found myself taking endless lefts and rights through the back roads lined with cornfields. In my passenger seat, I had the now worn-out index card with the address and a brand-new family-sized package of Oreos. No one would tell me what kind of offering an Oracle would want, but who doesn't like Oreos? I'm not sure what I expected, but it wasn't what I found. Pulling up to the address, I took a long dirt path surrounded by trees that gave way to a large clearing where two double-wide trailer homes sat, private and hidden. The yard was a mess of old and new. An old plastic slide and playhouse were faded from years out in the elements. Yet next to them was a brand new playground structure made of beautiful dark wood. The green plastic slide looked shiny and inviting, and the swings were pristine with their chains clanging softly in the breeze. I turned my attention to the houses. Between them was an awning in which two cars sat parked, a beat-up Jeep Wrangler and a sporty-looking BMW. Before I noticed her, she was in front of me, holding out a hand to shake. She was a younger girl. We must have been around the same age. She wore a dirty work shirt and stained overalls. Brown hair lied braided behind her back. Brown eyes looked up at me expectantly, waiting for me to shake her hand. I was about to explain myself and tell her that I was looking for the Oracle, but she cut me off before I could open my mouth. "Hi, Elise."
I'm Alex.
"But you've probably heard of me as the Oracle." "Nice to finally meet you." Wordlessly, I shook her hand. "Come inside. You can sit on the couch while I freshen up." "We'll be in the left house," she said, and without any further discussion, she turned and began walking away. I followed her, but before I got to the door, she turned and said, "Don't forget the Oreos. Double stuff is my favorite." When I walked in, I was greeted by a small, cozy home. To the left was the kitchen, and to the right was a small dining room table, old and worn, with beat-up chairs to match. Walking past the table, I found the living room, furnished with luxury couches that were almost too big to fit the space. I sat and was faced with a large television that was nearly the size of the wall it hung on. I heard the shower running. It acted as brown noise, as my mind began to wander. I thought about how strange it all was. Some girl living all the way out here can see the future? I didn't believe her. Not at first. Even though she knew my name, I explained that away. I assumed one of the whisperers had told her. I hadn't told anyone about the Oreos, but eventually I figured that she had seen them in the passenger seat of my car. A loud tearing noise pulled me from my thoughts. I realized she was in the kitchen now, opening up the package of cookies. The shower was off. I don't know how long it had been off, but it was off. She was dressed in a different outfit of t-shirt and overalls, cleaner, but still stained with dirt and car grease. Her hair was dry. So, I began. But I wasn't sure what to say. I remember being thankful that she cut me off again. "Hey, sorry to leave you sitting there." I knew you would be here sometime, but I didn't know when. How did you know I would come here at all? I saw it, she said simply. The words hung in the air for a beat. Then another. You have questions, I'm sure. They always do. Would you sit with me? I can explain what I know, she said, motioning to the beat-up dining table. I remember I was unsure about whether I should sit down. I had thought about just leaving, that this was just some scam. But then I blinked, and I was sat facing her. A large candle sat between us with a lid on top. She was speaking about something and must have been deep in thought. Her eyes didn't meet mine as she continued on. Like I said, I don't get to control what I see or how far. Without anyone, I only get dreams. Fragments of thousands of futures that I can rarely make sense of. But when I have someone else here, I can see into the future through them. That's why I love new guests. Now, the visions are a sure thing. Fate or destiny or whatever you want to call it. It's fixed, it's just yet to be lived. She paused for a moment, then made eye contact with me again. Sorry if I was rambling. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure, was all I could say. You might be feeling a little disoriented, but that's normal. It's this property. The land has something about it. Feels like you're in a fog sometimes. Can I get you some water or anything? I remember this moment. It fills me with regret, anger, resentment. I didn't know when she started talking or how much I missed, but I was sure that something was wrong. I didn't remember sitting down. I didn't remember asking her a question. I felt high. I felt so far from anything real, sitting at that shitty table. And I meant to tell her. I meant to say that I felt ill, that I had cold feet, that I needed to leave. I opened my mouth. The words started. And then the blinds were closed, and the room was dark. The candle flickered as our only light. We held hands above the table together, like a seance. She was telling me to look deeply into her eyes, and only into her eyes. We both sat leaning forward. She stared into my eyes, and I stared into hers. The candlelight flickered. She bore into me with intensity. Her brown eyes looked darker in the candlelight. I was waiting. My lungs burned, and I realized I had been holding my breath. I exhaled and waited. Another moment passed. Then, the room began to glow. It was soft at first. An orange light that draped gently over the room. I looked around for the source. To my surprise, the candlelight was merely a whisper, and the blinds were still drawn. Look at me. I can't see unless you look into my eyes. The oracle reprimanded. I looked back at her, and her eyes emanated a faint orange light. Look deeper, she instructed. I obeyed. Her irises had changed from a common brown into something more. The orange became brighter, warmer. I heard birds singing. I felt the wind blowing. Everything was calm, serene. Her eyes were an early summer morning. They turned a shade of green, and I heard the leaves rustling in the breeze. It was all brighter now, hotter. She stared at me, with suns for eyes. I strained to keep my eyes open, but I felt compelled to look harder. I saw the clear blue sky of a summer's day, and then that blue gave way to purples and pinks as I watched the sunset. The night came, and her eyes twinkled with starlight. We were bathed in the light of a harvest moon. I watched the stars turn until the room began to glow orange again. Days passed in those eyes. Then weeks. And then months. I stared into those kaleidoscope eyes, and I watched the seasons pass. The colors danced around the room, gaining speed. I watched the storms gather. Dark, foreboding grays that swirled with intensity and power. Lightning flashed in her sockets, and I smelt the rain. I was enamored when she reached the autumn months. The room shone brilliant shades of brown, yellow, and red, and we were buried in the falling leaves. I was lost in the flashing lights of a life I've yet to live. Until suddenly it stopped. I found myself at the beat-up dining room table again. I was holding the hands of a stranger with a faint candle lit between us. We were both standing out of our chairs and leaning forward to see each other better. She looked into my eyes, and I looked into hers. Her eyes were plain and brown and gripped with fear. Well, what did you see? I ventured to ask. My questions seemed to pull her back into the moment with me. She threw my hands down, as if she were surprised to still be holding them, and began to back away from me into the wall. The oracle held her hands to her eyes, covering her face. From behind her hands, I heard a pleading whisper. No, 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 no. What did you see? Was all I could ask. She slammed her hands on the table and began to scream. No, no, no.
No.
No. No. There were tears in her eyes. Without warning, she had exploded into hysterics. I was frozen.
Stunned.
Too stunned in that moment to stop her as she took her first 2 fingers on each hand and began to gouge out her own eyes, all the while still screaming no. 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 She fell to the ground, screaming in defiance. What was left of her eyes hung out of her sockets and blood stained her face, her clothes, and especially her hands.
She was sobbing.
I began to approach her. I wanted to help her. I wanted to take her to a hospital. And selfishly, somewhere deep down, I needed to know what she saw. But I never got the chance. A harsh yellow light burst from her now empty eye sockets. It hummed with intensity and poured over me like a nuclear blast. The oracle sprung to her feet and screamed out in horror. Oh God, I can still see it. Without another word, she grabbed the table firmly with both hands and bashed her head against it. Everything around me drowned in the light. Explosions of yellow rattled me with each impact. She screamed and slammed her head again. My skin burned.
Slam.
My teeth ached with every sickening hit.
Slam.
Something cracked loudly. My eyes failed me. I saw only yellow. All-encompassing yellow. She screamed out again, a cry of terror, and with a final slam, the light was gone as quickly as it came. The oracle lay dead, an eyeless mess of fear and gore. In every sunrise, in every storm, in every clear sky, I see her ever-changing eyes watching me. At night, when everything is still, I hear my heartbeat, pounding away like a skull cracking against wood. And when sleep does finally take me, I see the yellow, whispering to me about impossible things that are yet to be. Thank you for watching my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to me.